And so what is a truth anyway? Is it a guiding light? Is it something that makes us feel like we're making the right decisions? We're going in the right direction? Is it a moral compass? Is it absolutes? Or is it more about perspective? Is it seeing things from a different lens and trying to discern, the truth that lies between? Can it be both, and is it mutually exclusive? What about safety and comfort? Is this what we tell ourselves to be and feel secure, to feel accomplished, to be self-actualized? This concept of self-actualization and reaching our full potential, do we need truth to do that? Or is it just a mindset? Is it a place, a time, a scenario? Does truth have a history? And is this something we inherently have in ourselves, or is it as a collective as well? And so I think these questions are all really interesting, and a lot of what I've learned is that there are intersections of truth. Everybody has a truth, at the individual level, at the collective level, at the teams. And it's these intersections of truth that actually make our jobs in UX and product really, really fascinating, right? And especially with what we do today, a lot of what we are trying to do is seek out truths. And so within the realm of product delivery, the truth of customer needs, right? Not just what they say they want, not what they say they need, but observing and reading between the lines and understanding what they actually need. I find this one really fascinating too, especially with regards to unmet customer needs. And oftentimes customers will give you symptoms or pain points, but is that actually the problem that needs solved? And then laddering up to that, how do we as teams work and collaborate together to make that happen, right? How do we partner to deliver the right solution at the right time? Where's the truth in that? And then our own individual role in all of this. How do we provide impact and value to make this happen, not just for our teams, but for our customers and the outcomes that they're trying to deliver? And so to summarize, the one truth that I'm focusing on today is around our customers, our teams, and ourselves, and how we work together to do that. So ultimately, why this is important, right? When we think about this laddering and these intersections of truth and people and teams, is really about delivering on a mission. And so for those of us in UX and product, it's all about delivering on the outcome for the customer, right? And I'll come back to this over and over again throughout the course of the presentation, because I think this concept is really integral for all of us to understand and deliver together. And so a framework that folks are probably loosely familiar with is this concept of people, process, and technology, right? This is called often the golden triangle. But I think the interesting thing about the golden triangle, which it doesn't always account for, is this concept of environment. And to me, I don't actually consider it a triangle. I think it's more of a ladder with people at the foundation. But in order to know that you're bringing in the right people to solve the right problem, you actually have to create the right environment for them to thrive and succeed in. And that takes into account things like culture, that takes things into account like core principles, things that are just really, really important. Now, this is basically a framework to help us understand frameworks, right? And so it may seem silly, but I think it's effective because it helps us concisely understand the areas that we need to invest and how this all ladders up. But I'll relate a story that I experienced in the past year that I think is quintessential definition of when to be relational and when to be transactional. And so this was a team that is responsible for a service, a platform service, that needed to get general consumption from a bunch of other teams. Now the challenge with that is it was a new and different way of A, building teams, B, building services or product, and then C, working together. So this is the first time that as a company we had done this. So already was trying to push a boulder up a hill. And so what ended up happening very often in these scenarios is they would go to other teams and say, hey, we have this mission, and we really, really need your help to make it successful. So if you could just give us requirements, that would make our jobs a lot easier. Now, I saw, a lot of friction in this. I saw people getting really upset and really frustrated, and the initial team didn't understand why this was such a big deal. And that's because they were treating that relationship like a transaction. Now, especially when you are looking to build trust and credibility between your teams, especially if you've never worked with another team before, you actually need to be relational. And so the way that you approach that and the language that you use is different. And so a great example of that is instead of saying like, hey, we need to do this thing and you need to help us, it should be the reverse of, hey, we have this initiative, we're spotting some trends, we think this might be a problem. Is this a problem for you? Can you talk to us about it? How do we make this successful for you? So it's turning it sort of on its head and saying like, help me. Instead of help me, it's how do I help you, right? And ultimately what it comes down to is giving a damn about people, giving a damn about their problems and really trying to understand what drives and motivates them and how you're going to help them. And so the truth number 2, very related as well, is as you're going about trying to deliver on these ambitious missions, as you're trying to get adoption of services within your teams, it's easy to think that product delivery is an assembly line, right? Because the great manufacturing companies of Ford and Toyota have really revolutionized in the past century this space to help us understand how you become more efficient and productive by breaking down smaller parts and delivering that way. And so the expectation is like, hey, yeah, we're going to get these people, process, and technology in place. We're going to really understand and streamline, and everyone's going to deliver at the exact time within the exact linear cycle, and everything's going to go great. And so that's the expectation often, right? But I think the reality is quite messier, and here's why. Because it's hard, actually, when you have just one small group of people. When we talk about these truths again, right, they're individual truths and there are collective truths. And as you start to grow that within your teams, it becomes quite messy. And so while I think assembly line process and that sort of mindset is helpful for us to understand generally how we should work together, it actually doesn't really take into account that people themselves and how they value themselves and their missions and how they see themselves in the role can be quite messy at times too. And I think in part that's because the assembly line style of thinking really incentivizes disconnected teams and work streams. And so when you don't know how what you do ladders up to the vision or success, you kind of focus more on your tasks and what you can do, and you identify with that versus identifying with a mission, right? And that can be challenging because then as we try to piece these things together, we realize maybe they don't overlap that well, and then our customers end up feeling that. Another way that I often phrase this, and I've seen this across companies too, and why something like digital transformation from an earlier talk ends up being really important, is this concept of making people feel your org chart. And so when you incentivize disconnected teams and work streams, what you're really doing is creating silos. And then once you actually piece your software together or your campaigns and you launch it, and you are trying to deliver this to the masses, your customers will feel that, and it's ultimately because they're feeling silos and org charts, and that's not what you want. And so I think symptoms for me, when I've seen in teams that might be a little dysfunctional or struggle a little with this concept, especially when breaking down silos, they kind of bear down on focusing again on areas of ownership. They want to put in more process because they think that's the thing that's going to get them success, right? It's worked for them in the past. That's obviously going to be the thing that works for us in the future. And then there are talks of like, well, we'll just have handoffs. We'll volley that over the wall, and then the dev team can just deal with that. But we still need sign-off at the end of the day. So once the dev team is done building that, I want to look at it and make sure that we're signed off so that it goes out the door. What that continues to perpetuate is that us versus them mentality. And it's actually not about the truths or the missions that we talked about earlier. It's not about the customer needs. It's not about how do we deliver on their outcomes and what they need. And so when I see teams that really struggle with these concepts, a lot of what I do, a lot of coaching and advisement on is around mindset shifts and language change. And so instead of areas of ownership, it's actually more about partnership. How do we partner together to be successful? And instead of more process, which not a hater of process, I'm a big believer that process is there to deliver value and you have to be thoughtful about it. But a lot of times, process is replacement for communication and actually talking, right? So you should be relational in those moments and not transactional. Instead of handoffs, what about collaboration? What does that look like? And how do you actually grow that in your teams? And then similarly with sign-offs, it's actually not about having the ability to sign off or be the final person to have the final say. It's more about what is your contribution to that mission. And so like I said, I'm going to keep coming back to, it's about delivering on the mission. Remember, that's what all of this is about. And so at the heart of the double diamond model and a couple different models that I've seen and what brings success is this concept of participatory design and bringing it to all stages. So again, it's breaking down those silos, and instead of going off in small pockets and like, well, I'm going to work on my thing, then I'm going to give it to you, and you're going to work on your thing, you actually invite all the key stakeholders into workshops and different participatory design sessions, right? Now, that doesn't mean that everything is being designed by committee. It doesn't mean that this is the only way you work. In fact, just like this model, I think it's actually important to then go away and divide and conquer, right? Figure out, instead of areas of ownership, figure out areas of partnership where somebody might be better suited to go handle this task, and another person might be better suited to go to handle that task. And that way you can come back over and over again and push and pull between these two different concepts, right? Another way that I actually like to look at it is kind of like a rubber band. So you're expanding, you're contracting, you're expanding, you're contracting over and over again through the life cycle of a project. And similarly, when you're expanding, there's a lot of chaos. But again, use that and channel that. Now, when you're contracting, you're essentially just bringing order and making sense of that chaos. And you're going off and making sure that you can deliver at an individual level, whereas the chaos is people coming together, right? Now, when you have mission-based teams, I think this model works really, really well because at the chaotic stages that you're channeling, you're involving people. And one of the things that I've seen time and time again with teams is when there's friction or when they're not successful, or it comes down to the sign-offs versus handoffs versus more process, it's often because people feel they aren't being consulted either at the earliest stage or along the way. And they're getting, developers, for example, are getting it when it's high fidelity and it's already at a point of no return. And I would even say in these stages, we should be involving PMs, engineers, UX all in one, so that we know that we're building the right thing in the right way. But at the heart of all of that, I think, is you have to be accountable and you have to hold you and your teams accountable as well. But accountability is a team sport. And so product managers are not the only people that are responsible for the success of a product, a feature, or an initiative. In fact, we are all accountable to our customers' success, period, right? But I think what gets in the way often is, again, when you have siloed teams, when you have an assembly line process, what ends up happening is people carry a very, very strong identity to their job function, and their job function only. Because again, if they are not mission-based teams and they don't understand what they're delivering on, what they do understand is what they do, and they do very, very well, especially at a task level. And so people place a lot of value in the tasks that they do, and not always the outcome. But ultimately, how do you transform people to think beyond that and think about that outcome so that everyone can be accountable to customer success? Now, what that ends up doing, especially for the folks who have a strong identity tied only to their role, is there ends up being this push and pull of, am I a UXer? Do I belong to the UX team? Or do I belong to this products team? What's the duality of those identities look like? I actually don't think there needs to be a duality. I feel like it's a false dichotomy. And so the advice that I often give here is to embrace the modality of purpose and identity. You can be both. You can be more than one, right? Like, one of the things I've often said when I have felt challenged in these areas at companies is I have more than one tribe. I have more than one team. I'm one of many teams. And yes, the truths within all of those teams are slightly different, but it's actually what makes us really, really powerful and able to work together to provide different perspectives to deliver the right thing at the right time. And again, coming back to delivering on the mission. Now, what this is all laddering up to, and something that I feel very, very strongly about, no matter the roles on your team, is that you have to create leadership in every single person. It doesn't matter if you're a startup, it doesn't matter if you're a big established company, right? For startups, they're a great example of, you have a small team and you've got to do a lot of stuff. The only way you scale that is by creating leadership in everybody. Even in large companies, it just means you're going to be doing more. You're going to try to grow at an astonishing rate as well. And the only way you can scale is if everybody feels a sense of leadership. And so what I think that really boils down to is this concept that leadership is not just a role, it's a responsibility. You hire really smart people for a reason. And at the foundation of that is trust. And if you trust the people that you have on board, arm them for success and then get out of their way and let them do their job. But also know that you don't hire people just to tell you yes. You don't hire people to tell you what you want to hear. You hire people to be professionals and experts at what they do. So it's your job to really be a coach and a guide there, right? I also call myself a shepherd all the time because it's my job to provide the environment that allows them to feel safe to explore disciplined risk-taking, but also so they have a sense of what they need to move forward. Do they have a sense of vision, mission, what we're working towards? Because if they don't, then that's on me and I need to provide that. And so this was a tweet about a month ago. One of the trends I've seen, especially with newer UX managers, and maybe UX isn't just, it's not unique just to UX, probably just managers in general, is this misunderstanding of they need to advocate, speak for their teams. Yes, and you also need to teach your folks how to own their voice at the same time. Because what happens when you're not in the room? What happens when you leave or somebody else leaves? What happens to their growth and their opportunity when they don't actually have real ownership? And so this comes back to leadership. In order to help people own their voice and really cultivate that in their organizations, you have to give them real ownership as well. But again, you're going to be the coach, the guide. You're going to make sure that the environment is safe and supported so that they actually can deliver on their own voice and feel like they have a seat at the table. And so I think the final truth, and a lot of what all this really focuses on and talks about, is there actually is no one truth, right? And these, are my truths that I'm sharing with you today. Maybe they resonate with you, maybe they don't. Maybe they're helpful, maybe they are not. But these are things that I have felt time and time again that I've seen in my career. And so I wanted to give the opportunity to really express that to folks because maybe it can help you at some point. And another interesting thing that I saw about a week ago, David Cancel of Performable HubSpot and Drip fame posted this maybe a few days ago. I screenshotted immediately because my talk is about one truth. And I found it really fascinating because it gets to the heart of how I think about things too in a different lens. And so I really love this. It's simple, but essentially you own your truth. Remember that, right? Show up. You show up when it's hard. You show up even when you're scared, right? That actually means you're growing. And just keep showing up. It is important that you show them your truth, whoever them is, right? And you do it by showing up and not backing down over and over again. And so you might be asking, isn't this just empathy? And this probably wouldn't be a UX talk if we didn't bring up empathy, right? So I'm not discounting empathy. I actually think it's very, very important. It is a foundational characteristic in what all of us do. But at the same time, empathy is not very nuanced. And so I prefer to think of it more as truth and the intersection of truth versus just empathy, because empathy is the blanket, right? Whereas when you get down in the weeds, you get down to all the complexities, there's so much more nuance that empathy just can't explain away. Again, it doesn't mean it's not important, but I think it, as we try to understand, especially in UX, we try to understand where we fit in this larger puzzle. Empathy isn't our only strength or skill set. Our truth actually is.